Have you ever driven 2,000 miles across the country fueled by nothing but rage and the desperate need to confront the man who destroyed your childhood? This isn't just another story about family betrayal. This is about a woman pushed to the edge, who finally chose the only path left to her, revenge. The highway stretched endlessly before me that night, each mile bringing me closer to the monster I'd spent 14 years trying to forget. My name is Emily Ross, and until 3 days ago, I thought I had successfully buried my past. At 32, I'd built a life in Riverton that looked nothing like the nightmare I'd escaped from. My corner office at Northline Studio had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a view I'd earned through years of climbing the corporate ladder as a creative director. I had a sleek apartment downtown, a BMW I'd bought with my first major bonus, and a carefully curated life where no one knew about the girl who used to flinch at raised voices. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was reviewing mood boards for a high-end residential project when my assistant knocked on my glass door. "Emily," she said, "you have a call on line 2. She says she's family." Family? The word made my stomach clench. I'd cut all ties 14 years ago, changed my number countless times, never left a forwarding address. My fingers hovered over the phone for a moment before I picked up. "Emily." "Oh, God. Emily, is that really you?" The voice was familiar, but aged, trembling with something between relief and desperation. My cousin Rachel, who'd been just a kid when I left. "Rachel," I managed, keeping my voice neutral, professional. "How did you find me?" "LinkedIn. I've been searching for years, Emily. I'm sorry to call you at work, but it's about your mom. She's sick. Really sick." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Laura Ross, the woman who'd chosen him over me, who'd stood silent while my childhood crumbled. "I don't have a mother, Rachel," I said, my voice hard. "Please don't hang up," Rachel pleaded. "She has cancer, Emily, stage 3. And she's still with him. Still with Frank. Frank Dalton." Even hearing his name made my skin crawl. The man who'd moved into our lives when I was 12, bringing his whiskey breath and heavy hands. The man who'd made our small house in Milford feel like a prison. "That's her choice," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "She asked for you, not directly. She'd never dare with Frank around. But I heard her crying, saying your name in her sleep. Emily, she needs help. He won't even take her to proper doctors. Says the local clinic is good enough." I turned my chair to face the window, watching the normal people living their normal lives 20 floors below. "Why are you calling me, Rachel? What do you expect me to do?" "I don't know. Maybe nothing. But I thought you should know. She might not have much time left." After I hung up, I sat in my office for an hour, canceling meetings, ignoring emails. My carefully constructed world suddenly felt tissue-thin. I'd spent years in therapy learning to say, what happened to me wasn't my fault. I deserved protection. I deserved a mother who chose me. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it were different things. That night, I couldn't concentrate on the project deadlines or the presentation for Monday. Instead, I found myself at my kitchen counter with a glass of wine, laptop open, searching for information about Milford. The town had barely changed. Same single main street, same rundown shopping center, same high school where I'd graduated early just to escape faster. I found Frank's Facebook page, though it was mostly privacy locked. His profile picture showed him older, grayer, but with the same cruel mouth I remembered. He listed his occupation as self-employed entrepreneur, which almost made me laugh, even from 1,000 miles away. I could smell the con artist on him. My mother didn't have social media, of course. Frank would never allow that kind of independence. But I found her in the background of a photo from the Milford 4th of July parade, thin, faded, standing slightly behind Frank like she was trying to disappear. The woman who'd once sung while cooking dinner, who'd braided my hair before school, who'd slowly dimmed under Frank's control until she was barely a shadow. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the single photo I'd kept from my childhood, Mom and me at the beach when I was 10. Before Frank, when it was just us against the world. Her smile reached her eyes. Then we'd eaten sandy sandwiches and collected shells until sunset, and she'd promised me we'd always be a team. For 2 days, I wrestled with the decision. 2 days of Rachel's words echoing, she might not have much time left. 2 days of remembering how I'd begged my mother to leave him, to choose us, to be brave just once. 2 days of hating myself for still caring. On the third morning, I walked into my boss's office. I need some time off, I said. Family emergency. He looked up from his monitor, concern creasing his forehead. Everything okay? No, I said honestly. But it's something I need to handle. I spent that afternoon making arrangements, postponing client meetings, setting up out-of-office replies, packing a bag. My hands shook as I folded clothes, as if my body remembered what my mind had tried to forget. The last time I'd packed to leave Milford, I'd shoved everything I owned into a backpack at 3 in the morning, crept down the stairs, avoiding the creaky third step, and run to the Greyhound station. This time, I was driving back. I loaded my BMW with more than clothes. I packed my laptop, my good camera, a voice recorder I used for client meetings. If I was going back to face Frank Dalton, I wasn't going as the scared 18-year-old who'd fled in the night. I was going as Emily Ross, successful professional who'd built a life despite him. But as I sat in my car in the parking garage, engine running, I couldn't shake the memory of the last time I'd seen him, the driveway of our house, him blocking my path, the gravel cutting into my palms when he'd shoved me down. You walk out that door, he'd said, and you're dead to this family. Your mother doesn't need an ungrateful brat like you. I'd believed him then. I'd believed I was worthless, difficult. The problem, it had taken years to understand, was never me. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel with an address, not the old house, but a smaller place on the outskirts of Milford. Of course, Frank had moved them. Probably lost the house to one of his schemes. I typed back, I'm coming. Don't tell them. Then I put the car in drive and headed for I-90 for the 2,000-mile journey back to the place I'd sworn I'd never return to. The highway stretched before me, and with each mile marker I passed, I felt myself hardening, preparing. I wasn't going back to save my mother. I'd learned long ago that people can only save themselves. I was going back for me, to face the monster from my nightmares, to show him that the girl he tried to break had not only survived but thrived. And maybe, just maybe, to finally get the closure that therapy and success and distance had never quite provided. The GPS showed 36 hours to Milford. 36 hours to figure out what exactly I was driving toward. 36 hours to prepare for whatever came next. I pressed harder on the accelerator, leaving Riverton and Emily Ross, the creative director, behind. With each mile, I was becoming someone else. Someone caught between who I'd made myself and who I'd been forced to leave behind. The road hummed beneath my tires, and I let the past wash over me, preparing for the reckoning ahead. The past has a way of creeping up on you when you're driving alone through the night. Somewhere around hour 10, as I crossed into Nebraska, the memories I'd locked away began seeping through the cracks. I was 12 when Frank Dalton entered our lives. Mom had been working double shifts at the diner, coming home with swollen feet and grease-stained uniforms, but she'd always had a smile for me. Then she met Frank at a bar, though she'd told me it was church at first, as if that would make him more acceptable. He was charming in that practiced way that men perfect, with his white smile and promises of taking care of us. "He's going to be good for us, Emily," she'd said, fixing her lipstick in our bathroom mirror. "You'll see. We won't have to struggle anymore." But Frank's version of taking care of us meant moving into our house, eating our food, and slowly taking control of every aspect of our lives. He didn't work, claimed he was between opportunities, waiting for the right business venture. What he actually did was drink beer on our couch, and criticize everything Mom and I did. The control started small. Comments about Mom's cooking, her appearance, the way she'd raised me. "The girl needs discipline, Laura," he'd say, eyeing me like I was a problem to be solved. "Structure, rules, a firm hand." Mom, exhausted from work and desperate to keep this man who paid attention to her, agreed. Suddenly, I had a curfew at 12 years old that would make a prison warden proud. I couldn't watch TV without permission. I couldn't use the phone without Frank listening in. I couldn't exist without his commentary on everything from my grades to my posture. By 13, I'd learned to make myself small, to walk silently through the house, to gauge Frank's mood by the number of empty bottles by his recliner. Mom had quit her job by then. Frank insisted he could provide for us with his investments. We lived off her savings first, then her credit cards, then the emergency fund she'd hidden in the coffee can. The physical stuff started when I was 15, not the kind that leaves obvious bruises where teachers might see. Frank was too smart for that. Shoves that could be explained away. Once, when I talked back about missing school for one of his family meetings, where he'd lecture us for hours about respect and gratitude, he grabbed my upper arm. The grip marks were hidden by long sleeves. He'd grab my face so hard I could feel his fingers pressing into my jaw. "You look at me when I'm talking to you," he'd said, his breath hot and sour with alcohol. "Your mother might let you run wild, but I won't." Mom had been standing right there, wringing her hands, saying nothing. That was the worst part. Not Frank's cruelty, but her silence. The way she'd learned to look through me instead of at me, as if acknowledging what was happening would make it real. I stopped at a truck stop in Des Moines, needing coffee and distance from these memories. The fluorescent lights were harsh, and I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, designer clothes, expensive haircut, subtle makeup that took 45 minutes to look natural. Everything about me screamed success, control, power. But underneath it all, I could still see that teenage girl who'd learned to flinch at footsteps. Back on the road, I let the memories come. The night I tried to tell Mom we should leave. I was 16. I had saved money from tutoring younger kids. I had researched women's shelters. She'd been doing dishes, her back to me, shoulders hunched. "We could go tonight," I'd whispered while he was at the bar. "I have $300. We could take the car and stop it." Her voice had been sharp, scared. "Just stop it, Emily. You don't understand how the world works. Where would we go? How would we live? At least here we have a roof over our heads." "But Mom," she turned then, and her face was older than her 38 years. "Do you think this is what I wanted? Do you think this is the life I dreamed of? But we make choices, Emily. We survive. That's what women like us do. We survive. Women like us, as if being trapped was hereditary, passed down from mother to daughter, like eye color or bone structure." The worst night came when I was 17. I'd gotten accepted to college, a state school with a scholarship that would cover most of my expenses. I'd hidden the acceptance letter for weeks, knowing Frank would explode. But eventually, Mom found it while cleaning my room. The fight was volcanic. Frank accused me of thinking I was better than them, of being ungrateful, selfish, abandoning my family. When I tried to defend myself, to explain that education was my way out, he'd lost it completely. That was the night he'd shoved me in the driveway. Gravel biting into my palms, my knees. The night he'd stood over me and told me exactly what he thought of ambitious girls who didn't know their place. Mom had watched from the doorway, backlit by the porch light, silent as always. I'd left 3 weeks later, the day I turned 18. Now, 14 years later, I was driving back. The flat plains of Iowa gave way to the rolling hills of Illinois, then the familiar forests of Wisconsin. With each state line I crossed, I felt myself changing, hardening. The successful woman I'd become was preparing for battle with the ghost of who I'd been. I thought about Frank's patterns, his weaknesses. He'd always been sloppy when drunk, running his mouth about his various schemes. He'd had a gambling problem even then. Mom's missing grocery money, the overdue bills despite his promises of providing. Mom's missing grocery money, the overdue bills despite his promises of providing. He thought he was smart, but he was just cruel, and cruelty often makes people careless. In Madison, I stopped for the night at a decent hotel. I couldn't show up exhausted and vulnerable. I needed to be sharp, prepared. I lay in the starched sheets thinking about Mom, wondering if she'd recognize me, wondering if there was anything left of the woman who'd once danced with me in the kitchen to old Motown songs. The next morning, I dressed carefully, professional, but not flashy, strong, but not threatening. I wanted Frank to see what I'd become, but not feel challenged enough to lash out immediately. I knew his type. They needed to feel superior, in control. Let him think he still had power over me. Right until the moment he realized he didn't. 5 hours from Milford, I pulled over and called Rachel. "I'm close," I said. "Tell me what I'm walking into." Her voice was worried. "Frank's the same, maybe worse. He's got his hands in some sketchy stuff. Everyone knows, but nobody says anything. Your mom, Emily. She's so thin and quiet. It's like she's fading away. Does he know you contacted me?" "God, no. He'd kill me." She paused. "Well, not literally. Actually, I don't know anymore. He's got a mean streak a mile wide these days." I thought about the 12-year-old girl who just wanted her mother to choose her just once. The 15-year-old who'd learned to navigate a minefield in her own home. The 17-year-old who'd been shoved down in a gravel driveway and told she was worthless. "Good," I said. "Let him be mean. I'm not a child anymore." The last 100 miles felt both endless and too quick. Signs for Milford started appearing, home of the 1987 state champion Bulldogs, and a great place to raise a family. I almost laughed at the irony. As I took the exit for Highway 52 that would lead me to Milford, I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was calm. Somewhere between Riverton and here, between the woman I'd become and the girl I'd been. I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for, purpose. I wasn't here to save my mother or confront my past for closure. I was here to end Frank Dalton's hold over what remained of my family. One way or another, this trip would be the last time he had any power in our lives. The cornfields gave way to the outskirts of town, and I turned onto Oak Street, muscle memory guiding me toward a reckoning 14 years in the making. The phone call came while I was still parked outside Milford city limits, gathering courage in a McDonald's parking lot. Rachel's number flashed on my screen. "Emily, where are you?" Her voice was strained, urgent. "Close. What's wrong?" "Your mom. She collapsed this morning. She's at Milford General. Frank's there, too, making a scene about insurance and bills. Emily, she looks bad. Really bad." My carefully planned approach crumbled. I'd imagined days of reconnaissance, strategic moves, slow manipulation, but cancer didn't care about my timeline. I'm 10 minutes away, I said, already starting the car. Milford General Hospital hadn't changed much. The same tired brick building with additions tacked on like afterthoughts. I parked and sat for a moment, staring at the entrance. Somewhere inside was my mother, possibly dying, and the man who'd made our lives hell. The smell hit me first, that universal hospital cocktail of disinfectant and despair. I found Rachel in the waiting room, older now, worry lines etched around her eyes. She jumped up when she saw me. Emily. Oh God, you look good. Different. Where is she? Room 204. But Frank. I knew. The elevator ride felt eternal. When the doors opened on the second floor, I could hear his voice immediately carrying down the corridor. Through the doorway of 204, I saw them. Mom, tiny in the hospital bed, machines beeping around her. And Frank, his back to me, gesturing wildly at a tired-looking nurse. I don't care about your policies, he was saying. We can't afford. Frank, I said. He turned at my voice, and for a second, I saw surprise flicker across his face. Then his features hardened into the sneer I remembered. Well, he said. Look what crawled back. The prodigal daughter here to grace us with her presence. He'd aged poorly. Where I remembered a man, who at least maintained a veneer of respectability, now stood someone whose dissolution was written in every line. Bloated face, bloodshot eyes, clothes that had seen better days. The small-town con man who'd never made it big. I'm here to see my mother, I said, keeping my voice level. Your mother, he laughed, ugly and sharp. You gave up that right when you abandoned us. 14 years, not a word, not a penny to help while I've been caring for her. I moved past him to the bed. Mom's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. She looked like a bird, all bones and translucent skin. I took her hand, careful of the foreline. Mom? Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening as they landed on me. Emily. The word was barely a whisper. Is it? Are you real? I'm here, Mom. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Frank's hand landed on my shoulder, gripping hard enough to hurt. That's enough. You've upset her. Get out. I stood slowly, turning to face him, and for the first time in 14 years, I didn't step back. Take your hand off me. Something in my tone must have surprised him because he actually did, though his face flushed darker. You think you can waltz in here after all this time, playing the concerned daughter? Where were you when the bills piled up? When she needed treatments? Where was I? I kept my voice calm, aware of the nurse still hovering nearby. I was building a life, after you made it clear I wasn't welcome here. Tell me, Frank, what happened to Mom's health insurance? The house, her savings. His face went from red to purple. You don't know anything about our situation. I know enough. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the billing department. We are getting Mom moved to a private room, and I'm covering all medical expenses from here on. You can't. Yes, I can, and I will. What I won't do is stand here and let you pretend you've been some devoted caregiver when we both know exactly what you are. The nurse cleared her throat. Perhaps we should continue this discussion outside, the nurse suggested. Mrs. Ross needs rest. Frank stormed out, and I knew he'd be waiting in the hallway, ready for round 2. But first, I leaned down to Mom. I'm not leaving, I whispered. I'm here now, and things are going to change. Her fingers squeezed mine weakly. He'll be angry. Let him. Outside the room, Frank was pacing like a caged animal. When he saw me, he moved close, using his size to try to intimidate me. You think you're something special now? Think your fancy clothes and city attitude mean anything here? You're still the same worthless. I'm staying at the Riverside Inn, I cut him off. Room 12. If you have something to say to me, you can say it there. Not here where Mom can hear. Don't you tell me what to do. This is my town. My town. I smiled, and something in my expression made him step back. We'll see about that. I walked away, leaving him sputtering in the hallway. Rachel was still in the waiting room, wringing her hands. How did it go? About as expected. I sat beside her, suddenly exhausted. Tell me everything, I said. His businesses, his debts, who he's running with these days, everything. She glanced around nervously. Not here. Can we get coffee? We went to the town's single decent cafe, tucked into a corner booth over bitter coffee, and pie I didn't taste. Rachel painted a picture of Frank's decline, the failed used car lot, the underground poker games, the money he borrowed from people who didn't accept excuses. There's talk he's been selling stuff that's not exactly legal, she whispered. Pills, maybe. I don't know for sure. But Tommy Morrison, you remember him? He's a sheriff's deputy now. He mentioned Frank's name came up in some investigations. Mom knew. I think she suspected, but what could she do? She's been sick for over a year. Emily, Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. It started with stomach pain. She ignored it because they couldn't afford doctors. By the time she couldn't hide it anymore. My coffee had gone cold. All those years of therapy, telling myself I'd made the right choice by leaving, that I couldn't save someone who wouldn't save themselves. But sitting here, hearing about her slow decline while Frank drained whatever life she had left, I felt the old guilt mixing with new rage. Will you help me? I asked. Rachel looked scared but nodded. What are you going to do? What I should have done years ago, I replied. This? That night, I sat in my hotel room making lists. What I knew. What I needed to find out. Who might help. Frank had made enemies in this town. He wasn't clever enough not to. I just needed to find them, connect the dots, give them a reason to speak up. My phone rang at midnight. Unknown number, but I knew who it would be. Riverside, room 12, I answered. Heavy breathing. Then Frank's voice, slurred with alcohol. You think you're better than us. Always did. Too good for your family. Are you drunk, Frank? Don't you come here acting like you care. 14 years you left us with nothing. I left with nothing, I corrected. You made sure of that. Your mother cried for you. Cried every Christmas, every birthday. But did you care? Did you even send a card? The words stung because there was truth in them. I had cut contact completely, too afraid that any crack in my resolve would pull me back into their dysfunction. Where are you, Frank? Wouldn't you like to know? Think you can waltz in and take over? I've got friends in this town, people who owe me. You're nothing here. Nothing. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, then at my lists, my plans. Frank was right about one thing. I had abandoned my mother, but he was wrong about everything else. I wasn't nothing. Not anymore. And before I left Milford again, he would understand exactly who he was dealing with. The scared teenager he'd pushed around was gone. In her place stood someone with resources, connections, and absolutely nothing left to lose. I opened my laptop and began researching. Property records, business licenses, court documents, all public information, all painting a picture of a small-time criminal who thought he was untouchable in his tiny kingdom. He had no idea what was coming. Outside, Milford slept peacefully, a quiet town harboring quiet secrets. But change was coming, whether it was ready or not. I'd driven 2,000 miles for this reckoning. Now it was time to see it through. The drive back to Milford had taken 36 hours, but those hours on the road had been more than just miles covered. Each rest stop, each lonely stretch of highway, each cup of gas station coffee had been a step in preparing myself for what lay ahead. I'd left Riverton at dusk, my BMW packed with more than clothes. The trunk held files from 14 years of distance, printouts of every public record I could find on Frank Dalton, every business registration, every court filing. During stops, I'd researched on my laptop, building a picture of his life since I'd fled. The first night, I'd driven straight through until exhaustion forced me to stop at a motel outside Des Moines, lying on the lumpy mattress, staring at water stains on the ceiling. I'd let myself remember the good times before Frank, Mom teaching me to make a famous apple pie, the crust never quite right, but both of us laughing at our flour-covered faces, dancing to the radio while we cleaned on Saturday mornings, her reading to me every night, doing different voices for all the characters. That woman felt like a stranger now, as distant as the 18-year-old girl who'd run away in the middle of the night. The second day brought clarity with the sunrise. Somewhere in Illinois, surrounded by endless cornfields, I'd called my therapist. "I'm going back," I told her. Dr. Martinez's voice was careful through the phone. "How are you feeling about that decision?" "Terrified, angry, determined." I paused. "Ready? Remember what we've discussed. You can't save anyone who doesn't want to be saved. You can only control your own actions and responses." "I know. This isn't about saving her anymore. It's about stopping him." There had been silence. Then, "Be careful, Emily. Men like that are most dangerous when cornered." I'd thought about her words through Wisconsin as familiar landmarks began appearing. The Cheese Castle tourist trap where Mom had taken me once, both of us giggling at the absurdity, the exit for the lake where I'd learned to swim. Each mile marker counting down to a confrontation years in the making. I'd stopped for the night just an hour from Milford, needing to arrive fresh, sharp. In the hotel business center, I'd researched more. Frank's failed used car lot, closed after multiple complaints. His name on incorporation papers for businesses that existed only on paper, small-time schemes that revealed a pattern of desperation. But it was the gambling that interested me most, records of liens, mentions in court documents, a trail of debt that would make anyone desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. They take risks. They cross lines they shouldn't cross. The final morning, I dressed carefully, professional blazer over designer jeans. Successful, but not intimidating. I'd practiced in the mirror, seeing not the scared girl who'd fled, but the woman who'd built a career in one of the country's most competitive industries. The woman who'd learned to handle difficult clients, impossible deadlines, and office politics that would make small-town drama look like child's play. The drive through Milford had been surreal. Main Street looked older. Shops I remembered were replaced by dollar stores and payday loan offices. The economic decline was written in every boarded window, every faded sign. This wasn't the thriving small town of my childhood memories. This was a place holding on by its fingernails. Perfect hunting ground for a predator like Frank. I'd driven past the old house on Maple Street. Someone else lived there now. Children's toys were scattered on the lawn I'd once mowed every Saturday. The window I'd climbed out of that final night had new curtains. Life had moved on without us. Following Rachel's directions to the new place, I'd found myself in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The house was small. Vinyl siding stained with neglect, lawn overgrown, Mom's prized rose bushes, which she'd managed to grow even at our worst times, were dead stumps by the front steps. I'd sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching. There was no movement inside. Frank's truck wasn't in the driveway, rust-eaten, and listing to one side on what looked like a bad tire. Everything about the place screamed decline, failure, the end of the line. My phone had buzzed. Rachel again. Frank's at Murphy's bar. Like every afternoon. You could see your mom alone. But I decided against it. That would be the old pattern, sneaking around, avoiding confrontation, letting him control the narrative. No, this time would be different. Instead, I'd driven downtown, past Murphy's, where Frank's truck sat among other day drinkers' vehicles, past the courthouse, where records of his failures were filed, past the sheriff's office, where Deputy Tommy Morrison might be interested in talking to an old classmate about new information. I'd ended up at the Riverside Inn, the town's only decent hotel, checking in. I'd recognized the desk clerk, Stacey Williams, 3 years behind me in school, who'd married right after graduation and never left. Emily Ross. Her eyes had widened. I heard you were some big shot in the city now. Just visiting family, I'd said, keeping it simple. Oh? Her expression had shifted. Sympathy mixed with curiosity. Everyone knew about Mom's illness, about Frank. Small towns held no secrets, just agreed upon silences. In my room, I'd unpacked methodically, laptop on the desk, files arranged, voice recorder charged, camera ready. If Frank Dalton had taught me anything, it was that bullies relied on their victims' silence and shame. But I wasn't ashamed anymore, and I was done being silent. I'd spent the afternoon making calls to the hospital billing department, arranging for Mom's transfer to a better room, full payment guaranteed, to a private investigator in Madison who specialized in financial fraud, to a lawyer who'd gone to Milford High 10 years before me and understood exactly why someone might need help dealing with a certain kind of stepfather. Each call had been a brick in the wall I was building. Each arrangement another step toward cornering Frank in his own game. As the sun set over Milford, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple I'd forgotten existed, I stood at my hotel window, planning my next moves. Tomorrow, I'd see Mom at the hospital again. Tomorrow, Frank would escalate because men like him always did when threatened. The drive had ended, but the journey was just beginning. The morning after my confrontation with Frank at the hospital, I arrived at Mom's house at 8 in the morning, knowing he'd still be sleeping off his nightly bourbon. The neighborhood was quiet, just the distant sound of dogs barking and a lawn mower somewhere down the street. I parked across from the house and studied it in daylight, peeling paint, a broken gutter, a yard that spoke of neglect and surrender. The front door was unlocked, typical of Frank's arrogance. Who would dare enter his domain? I pushed it open, the familiar creak making my stomach clench with muscle memory. Inside, the smell hit me first, stale cigarettes, old alcohol, and something else. Decay. Not just physical, but the smell of lives rotting from the inside out. The living room was worse than I'd imagined. Bottles lined the coffee table like soldiers. Mail piled unopened on every surface, bills, final notices, threats in official envelopes. Mom's china cabinet, her pride and joy inherited from her mother, stood empty, its contents likely pawned. I moved through the house like a ghost, documenting everything with my phone, the empty refrigerator, safe for beer and condiments, the bathroom with its army of prescription bottles, some in Mom's name, many not. The spare room turned into Frank's office, cluttered with losing lottery tickets and racing forms. In what had been my old room, I stopped short. It was storage now, boxes piled high. But on the dresser sat a single photo, my high school graduation picture. The frame was dusty but carefully positioned. And I realized, Mom must come in here. Must stand where I stood now and remember. What the hell are you doing in my house? I turned, unsurprised. Frank stood in the doorway, boxer shorts and a stained undershirt, looking every bit the cliché he'd become. His face was bloated with sleep and alcohol, eyes bloodshot, but sharp with rage. "Good morning, Frank," I said, keeping my voice pleasant, continuing to take photos. "Just documenting Mom's living conditions for the social worker." "Social worker? What social worker?" "The one I'll be calling if Mom's environment doesn't improve dramatically." I moved past him into the hallway, and he grabbed my arm. That old familiar grip that once would have paralyzed me. "You don't touch anything. You don't call anyone. You get out now." I looked down at his hand, then up at his face and smiled. "You have exactly 3 seconds to let go of me before I call the police and file assault charges." 1. His grip tightened. "You think you can threaten me in my own house?" 2. Something in my complete calm must have reached through his hangover, because he released me, though his face went purple with fury. "This is my house. Laura is my wife. You have no rights here." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record, "this house is in Mom's name. I checked the county records. Just like the car you've been driving is in her name. Just like the credit cards you've maxed out are in her name. Should I continue?" He took a step toward me, fist clenched, and I held my ground. "Please do assault me. It'll make everything so much easier." He stopped, confusion mixing with rage. This wasn't the script he knew. I wasn't cowering or running. I wasn't even raising my voice. "What do you want?" The words came out strangled. "I want you gone, Frank. Out of this house. Out of Mom's life. Out of Milford if you're smart." He scoffed. "Which we both know you're not." He laughed, ugly and forced. "You're delusional. Laura needs me. She's nothing without me, just like you were nothing. Running away like a coward, leaving her behind." "You're right," I said, and saw a flicker of surprise cross his face. I did run. I was 18 and terrified, and saw no other option. But here's what you don't understand, Frank. I'm not 18 anymore. I'm not terrified, and I have options you can't even imagine. I walked to the living room, him trailing behind, sputtering threats that sounded increasingly hollow. On the coffee table, among the bottles and unpaid bills, I spotted what I'd been looking for, a notebook. Frank's careful records of his gambling debts. He'd always been meticulous about tracking what he owed, even as he'd been reckless about accumulating it. Don't touch that. But I was already photographing pages, names, amounts, dates. Tommy Morrison would be very interested in some of these names, people the sheriff's office had been watching for years. Here's what's going to happen, I said, setting the notebook down. You're going to pack your things and leave. Today. You're going to sign papers removing yourself from any claim to this house or Mom's accounts. You're going to disappear, Frank. Like smoke. Or what? He was trying for menacing, but I heard the fear underneath. You'll call the cops. With what proof? I asked. Oh, Frank. I pulled out a manila folder from my bag. Would you like to see the sworn statement from Janet Mills about the pills you sold her? Or the one from Bob Patterson about the money you borrowed and never repaid? What about the photos of you meeting with Ray Kozlowski? You remember Ray, the one under federal investigation for running illegal gambling operations. His face had gone from purple to gray. You're bluffing. Am I? I spread photos on the coffee table, him entering known gambling dens, exchanging packages with suspicious figures, documentation I'd gathered in just 2 days of digging. You've been sloppy, Frank. Small town doesn't mean invisible. People talk. They just needed someone to listen. Your mother won't let you do this. She loves me. My mother is dying, I said flatly. Dying while you've drained every penny, destroyed every good thing she had left. You want to test whether she'll choose you over her daughter, when I'm the one paying for her cancer treatment. When I'm the one offering her a chance at peace in whatever time she has left. He sank into his recliner, suddenly looking older, smaller, the bully deflating when his victim refused to play the role. I've got nothing, he said. Where would I go? That's not my problem, but I suggest somewhere far from here. Somewhere the people you owe money to won't look. I left him there among his bottles and bills, knowing I'd planted the seeds. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Frank was intimately acquainted with fear. He'd just always been on the other side of it. At the hospital, Mom was awake, looking better after a night of proper care in her new private room. When I told her Frank and I had talked, she gripped my hand. Is he angry? He's leaving, Mom. It's over. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Relief, grief, years of emotions she'd bottled up. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger. You're strong enough now, I said. That's all that matters. That evening, back at the hotel, I got the call I'd been expecting. Frank, drunk again, voice slurring threats and pleas. You destroyed our family, he finished. You destroyed everything. No, Frank, I said quietly. That was all you. I hung up and opened my laptop, drafting emails to the contacts I'd made, the social worker, who'd be checking on Mom, the lawyer preparing paperwork, the investigator tracking Frank's connections. Each piece moving into place, a chess game where I could see 12 moves ahead, and Frank could barely see one. Outside my window, Milford slept peacefully. But in one rundown house on the outskirts, a man was realizing his kingdom was built on sand, and the tide had finally come in. The 18-year-old girl he'd driven away had returned as something he'd never expected, his reckoning. The next 3 days, I became a ghost haunting Frank's life, not through direct confrontation. That would have been too simple, too expected. Instead, I worked the edges, pulling threads that would unravel everything he'd built on the backs of others' misery. My first stop was Tommy Morrison at the sheriff's office. We'd been in the same chemistry class junior year, and he'd grown into exactly the kind of cop you'd want in a small town. Emily Ross, he said, standing up from his desk. Heard you were back in town. News travels fast. Always does. He gestured to a chair. Sorry about your mom. Cancer's a bastard. It is. But that's not why I'm here. I placed a folder on his desk. I want to report several crimes. Prescription fraud, illegal gambling operations, and elder financial abuse. His expression shifted from sympathetic to professional. You want to tell me who we are talking about? I think you already know. He was quiet for a moment. Then Frank Dalton's been on our radar for years. Problem is, nobody wants to testify. Too scared, too ashamed, or too deep in themselves. What if I told you I have 3 people willing to make statements? What if I had photos, dates, evidence of him using my mother's identity to commit fraud? Tommy leaned forward. Then I'd say, you should be very careful. Frank's connected to people who don't handle problems through legal channels. I know. That's why we need to move fast. I spent an hour with Tommy, laying out what I had gathered. Janet Mills, whose grandson needed surgery, desperate enough to buy pills from Frank. Bob Patterson, whose hardware store was struggling, who'd borrowed money at interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. Marie Henley, who'd given Frank her social security number for what he'd promised was a legitimate investment opportunity. How did you find all this in 3 days? Tommy asked. I started calling people who knew my mother, expressed concern about her situation. Amazing how much people want to talk when someone finally asks the right questions. After leaving the sheriff's office, I drove to Milford Community Bank. The manager, David Lynn, was new to town but sharp enough to recognize an opportunity when it walked through his door. "I'd like to discuss my mother's accounts," I said. Specifically, unusual activity over the past 5 years. What we found was a masterclass in small-time fraud, checks written to cash in Frank's handwriting. Credit cards opened using Mom's information, but with billing addresses she'd never lived at. A reverse mortgage taken out on the house, Mom's only real asset, with the proceeds disappearing into the ether of Frank's schemes. "This is extensive," David said, adjusting his glasses. "Your mother would need to file a police report to dispute these transactions." "She will. But first, I need you to freeze everything. Every account, every card, every access point Frank might have." That afternoon, I met with 3 of Frank's victims at the library. Janet Mills cried as she told me about buying pain pills from Frank for her arthritis when she couldn't afford a doctor. Bob Patterson's hands shook as he showed me the informal IOU Frank had made him sign, interest compounding weekly. Marie Henley, 73 years old, explained how Frank had convinced her he was starting a medical transport business, how she'd given him her information to be a founding investor. "Why didn't you report him?" I asked gently. Marie's answer spoke for all of them. "He said no one would believe us. Said he had connections, could make our lives miserable, and we saw what he did to your mother, dear. If he could control her like that, what chance did we have?" I recorded their statements, had them sign affidavits. Each signature was another nail in Frank's coffin, but also an act of courage from people who'd lived in fear for too long. That evening, Frank was waiting outside my hotel, not in the lobby. He was too smart for witnesses, but by my car in the poorly lit parking lot. I saw him from the hotel window and called Tommy Morrison before going out. 10 minutes, Tommy promised. Don't engage if you can avoid it. But I was done avoiding. I walked out, car keys in one hand, phone recording in my pocket. "Busy day?" Frank asked, pushing off from where he'd been leaning against a van. "Making friends, telling lies." "Just telling truths, Frank." "A novel concept for you, I know." He moved closer, and I could smell the bourbon. See the desperation in his eyes. "You think you're smart? Think you've got it all figured out, but you don't know who you're messing with." "Actually, I do," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "I know exactly who you are. A small-time con artist who peaked in high school. A bully who picks on the weak, because you're too pathetic to face anyone your own size. A parasite who's been feeding off my mother while she dies." His face contorted. "Your mother loves me. She chose me. You were just a burden, a reminder of her mistakes. Is that what you told yourself when you were stealing her money? When you were letting her suffer instead of getting proper treatment, because you'd rather spend the money on poker games? Shut up." His fists clenched. "Just shut up and leave. Go back to your fancy life and forget we exist." I tried that for 14 years. I tried. But you couldn't even let her die in peace, could you? Had to squeeze every last drop. Police lights flickered at the parking lot entrance. Frank saw them, too. Took a step back. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." Tommy Morrison's cruiser pulled up, and Frank melted back into the shadows. But I'd gotten what I needed, his threats on tape, his admission about Mom's money, his barely controlled violence, all evidence for the file growing thicker by the hour. That night, I sat in Mom's hospital room while she slept. The machines beeped steadily, and I thought about the price of silence, the cost of looking away. How many Janets and Bobs and Maries suffered because good people didn't want to get involved? How many mothers stayed with monsters because they couldn't see a way out? My phone buzzed, an unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Madison. The private investigator I'd hired. Ms. Ross, he said, his voice on the phone professional and clipped. I found some interesting connections regarding Mr. Dalton. Seems he owes significant money to some very unpleasant people in Milwaukee. People who've been looking for him. How significant? North of $50,000 in gambling debts from a failed real estate scheme 3 years ago. He's been hiding in Milford, but if word got out where he was. I thanked him and hung up. Another piece on the board. Another pressure point. Frank thought Milford was his kingdom, but it was really his hiding place. And I was about to blow his cover wide open. Mom stirred, eyes opening slowly. Emily, you're still here. I'm not going anywhere, Mom. Not until this is finished. She squeezed my hand weakly. He won't leave easily. He's like a tick dug in deep. Then we'll burn him out, I said. Whatever it takes. Outside the hospital window, Milford slept on, unaware that its careful balance of silence and complicity was about to shatter. Frank Dalton had ruled through fear for too long. But fear was a weapon anyone could wield, and I was just getting started. The pressure began to build like water against a dam. Each day, I tightened the vice around Frank's life, and each night he responded with escalating threats and increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. It started with my car. I came out of the hospital after visiting Mom to find deep scratches along the driver's side. A key job, amateur, but vicious. The security camera footage was conveniently corrupted, but I didn't need video evidence to know who was responsible. I photographed the damage and filed a police report, adding it to the growing pile of documentation. You need to be careful, Tommy Morrison warned when I stopped by the station. We've increased patrols around the hospital and your hotel, but Frank's getting unpredictable. Good, I said. Desperate people make mistakes. The next morning, I found a note shoved under my hotel room door. Leave or you'll regret it. Block letters attempting to disguise the handwriting, but I recognized the way Frank made his RS, a little flourish he couldn't quite suppress. I photographed it, bagged it, added it to the evidence file. But I wasn't backing down. Instead, I accelerated my campaign. I met with Susan Walsh, editor of the Milford Gazette, over coffee at the diner where Mom used to work. I have a story for you, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Local businessman running illegal prescription drug sales, targeting elderly residents, financial fraud spanning years. Susan, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd been running the small paper for decades, flipped through the documents. This is explosive, but Frank Dalton has friends. People who buy advertising, sit on the city council. Are his friends more important than Janet Mills, who had to choose between food and pain medication? Than Marie Henley, whose life savings are gone? She studied me over her coffee cup. You're Laura's daughter. The one who got out. I'm the one who came back. Why now? Because my mother is dying, and he's still feeding off her corpse. Because good people in this town are suffering in silence. Because someone needs to say enough. Susan was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I'll need to verify everything independently, but if even half of this checks out. It all checks out, I assured her. I have recordings, signed statements, documentation, and more people are ready to talk. They just needed someone to go first. That afternoon, I visited 3 more of Frank's victims. Word was spreading through Milford's gossip network that someone was finally standing up to Frank Dalton, and the floodgates were beginning to crack. An elderly couple, who'd been intimidated into silence after Frank sold them a car that died 2 weeks later. A young mother who'd borrowed money for her baby's medical bills, and was now paying triple in interest. Each story added weight to the case building against him. Frank's response came that evening. I was walking from my car to the hotel entrance when he emerged from the shadows, reeking of alcohol and desperation. You think you're destroying me, he slurred, blocking my path, swaying slightly. You're destroying your mother. When I leave, who will take care of her? You'll run back to your perfect life the second this is over. Step aside, Frank. She'll die alone because of you, just like she nearly died when you abandoned us. Do you know how many nights she cried? How many times she stared at that phone, waiting for a call that never came? The words hit their mark, but I didn't let it show. The difference between us, Frank, is that I'll be here for her now. You've been here for 14 years and done nothing but drain her dry. I gave her life, stability. Someone who didn't run at the first sign of trouble. You gave her fear, debt, cancer she couldn't treat because you'd gambled away the money. You want to talk about who destroyed her? Look in a mirror. He raised his hand, and for a second I thought he'd actually hit me right there in the hotel parking lot, but headlights swept across us as another car pulled in, and he lowered his fist. This isn't over, he snarled. You keep saying that, but we both know it is. The next day, things escalated further. Someone called the hospital claiming to be me, trying to cancel Mom's treatment authorization. Fortunately, I'd warned the staff about potential interference. Then came calls to my hotel room at all hours. Breathing, threats, hang-ups. I recorded them all, building my arsenal. But the real blow came when I returned to Mom's house to pick up some of her belongings. The front window was smashed. Glass scattered across the living room floor. Nothing stolen. This was a message, not a burglary. I called Tommy immediately. He's spiraling, Tommy said, surveying the damage. This kind of vandalism, the escalating threats, he's losing control. How much more do you need? I asked. How many laws does he have to break before you can arrest him? We are building the case, but for the major charges, the fraud, the drugs, we need the prosecutor to sign off. That takes time. Mom might not have time. That evening, I did something I'd sworn I wouldn't. I called in reinforcements. My business partner in Riverton, Marcus, answered on the second ring. Emily, how's it going out there? I need a favor. A big one. Name it. I need you to contact the Milwaukee Tribune. There's a reporter there, James Chen. He covers organized crime. Jesus. Are you sure you want to go there? He's not leaving any other way, and every day he stays, he's a danger to my mother and everyone else here. There was silence. Then I'll make the call, but be careful. Once that information's out there. I know. That night, I sat with Mom again. She was more alert. The new medications and proper care were making a difference. We talked about small things, the nurse who reminded her of her sister, the way the sunset looked through the hospital window, carefully avoiding the elephant in the room until she brought it up herself. Frank came by earlier, she said quietly, during my lunch break. The nurses wouldn't let him in. But I saw him through the door glass. What did he want? To tell me you're ruining everything, that you're turning the whole town against him. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a spark of the mother I remembered. Good. Mom, I've been a coward, Emily. For so many years. I've been a coward. Too scared to leave. Too scared to fight back. Too scared to protect you when you needed me. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But you're not scared. You're doing what I should have done years ago. It's not too late, I said. We can still fix this. Some things can't be fixed, baby. They can only be ended. She squeezed my hand. End this. Whatever it takes. As I left the hospital that night, I noticed a car following me. Not Frank's truck, something newer, darker. It stayed 3 cars back, but took every turn I did. I drove past my hotel, taking random turns until I was sure. Then I called Tommy. I've got a tail. Black sedan. License plate starts with M7. Where are you? Heading down Route 23 toward the old industrial area. Keep driving. We'll intercept. 5 minutes later, police lights filled my rearview mirror. The sedan peeled off, speeding away, but not before Tommy's partner got the full plate number. Milwaukee registration. The word was out. Back at the hotel, I triple-locked my door and pushed a chair against it. Things were moving fast now. Maybe too fast, but there was no stopping it. The avalanche had started, and Frank Dalton was standing directly in its path. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. You've killed me, Frank's voice said, more sober than I'd heard it in days. Those people in Milwaukee. Do you know what they'll do? What you should have done years ago. Leave? Your mother. We'll be better off without you. We all will. I'll burn it all down before I run. The house. Everything. You'll have nothing left of your precious memories. Go ahead, I said. Burn it all. You already destroyed everything that mattered in that house years ago. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my hotel room, listening to the sounds of Milford at night. Somewhere out there, Frank Dalton was realizing his reign of terror was over. The man who'd made my childhood a nightmare, who'd slowly killed my mother with neglect and greed, who'd preyed on the vulnerable for years, was finally facing consequences. The scared girl he'd pushed down in the driveway was gone. In her place sat someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something worse. The Milwaukee Tribune article hit the internet at 6 in the morning. Missing drifter located in small Wisconsin town. James Chen had been surgical with the information, never mentioning Frank by name, but providing enough details that anyone looking would connect the dots. By 8 in the morning, Susan Walsh had published her exposé in the Milford Gazette, local man accused of elderly fraud, illegal drug sales. The dam broke. My phone rang constantly as more victims came forward. The elderly woman, who'd been too ashamed to admit Frank had convinced her to sign over her car title. The young father who'd borrowed money for his daughter's insulin and was now paying loan shark rates. Each story was another crack in Frank's carefully constructed facade of respectability. At the hospital, Mom watched the morning news with something approaching wonder. They're talking about him, she whispered, pointing at the TV. Like he's a criminal. He is a criminal, Mom. He always has been. I knew, she said quietly. Deep down. I always knew. But knowing and doing something about it. She trailed off, then looked at me with clearer eyes than I'd seen in years. You're doing what I couldn't. That afternoon, I had a meeting that would accelerate Frank's downfall. Robert Henley, Marie's son, was a prosecutor in Madison who had driven down after hearing about his mother's losses. 73 years old, he said, jaw tight with controlled fury. She worked her whole life, saved every penny, and this piece of, he stopped, composed himself. I've reviewed the evidence you've compiled with the witness statements and documentation. We have enough for multiple felony charges. How long before you can move? I'm filing emergency paperwork today, but Emily, you need to know. Frank's going to get desperate. Men like him, when they are cornered. I know. I'm prepared. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. That evening, I stood before a crowded room at the community center. Word had spread about the meeting, support group for Frank Dalton's victims. The flyers had said I expected maybe a dozen people. Nearly 50 showed up. They sat in folding chairs, some elderly, some young, all wearing the same expression of shame mixed with hope. Janet Mills was in the front row, clutching her purse. Bob Patterson sat near the back, hat pulled low. Marie Henley had brought her knitting, fingers working nervously. "Thank you for coming," I began. "I know how hard this is. For years, Frank Dalton has operated in the shadows, counting on our silence, our fear, our shame. But shame belongs to the perpetrator, not the victims. And fear only has the power we give it." For an hour, people shared their stories. A contractor who'd been stiffed on payment and threatened when he tried to collect. A single mother who'd made the mistake of dating Frank briefly and found her credit destroyed. Story after story of manipulation, intimidation, and fraud. "What can we do?" someone asked. "He's been untouchable for so long." "He's not untouchable anymore," I said. "The sheriff's office is building a case. The state prosecutor is involved. The people he owes money to in Milwaukee know where he is. His world is crumbling, and it's because you're brave enough to speak up." As the meeting ended, people exchanged phone numbers, formed connections. The isolation that Frank had used as a weapon was breaking down. But as I walked to my car, I noticed something wrong. The parking lot lights were out. All of them. I reached for my phone, but a hand grabbed my wrist. Frank emerging from behind a van, eyes wild with rage and desperation. "You did this," he hissed. "You destroyed everything." I twisted free, backing toward the community center entrance. "You destroyed yourself, Frank." I just turned on the lights. "Your mother will have nothing. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. There's no money, no insurance, nothing. You think you've won? You've left her with nothing. She'll have freedom. That's more than you ever gave her." He lunged forward, and I sidestepped, using his momentum to send him stumbling. Years of self-defense classes, taken to ensure no man would ever make me feel helpless again, kicked in. "Stop," I commanded, loud enough that people leaving the meeting turned to look. "Everyone can see you." "Frank, is this who you want them to see?" The big man attacking a woman in a parking lot. He froze, suddenly aware of the witnesses. 20 people, maybe more, all watching, all seeing Frank Dalton for exactly what he was. "This isn't over," he said. But the words were hollow now, a broken record playing its last rotation. "Yes, it is," Tommy Morrison's voice came from behind me. He must have been attending the meeting in plain clothes. "Frank Dalton, you're under arrest for assault, terrorist threats, and violation of a restraining order." "What restraining order?" Tommy smiled grimly. "The one Judge Harrison signed this afternoon. You can't come within 500 feet of Ms. Ross or her mother." As Tommy cuffed him, Frank's mask finally slipped completely. He screamed obscenities, threats, promises of revenge, but it was the desperate wailing of a bully who'd finally met consequences. The audience he'd terrorized for years watched in silence as he was led to the police car. "You okay?" Tommy asked before leaving. "Better than okay," I said, and meant it. The next morning, the Milford Gazette ran a photo of Frank's arrest on the front page. By noon, 3 more people had come forward with complaints. By evening, Robert Henley had filed formal charges: fraud, elderly abuse, illegal drug sales, identity theft. The list went on. But the real victory came when I visited Mom that afternoon. The social worker had been by, arranging for home health care once she was released. The bank had frozen all accounts pending investigation, but I'd already set up new ones in Mom's name only. The house, despite Frank's threats, was salvageable. The reverse mortgage was fraudulent and therefore void. "He's really gone?" Mom asked. "He's in custody," I replied. "Bail set at $50,000, which he doesn't have, and with the Milwaukee connections public, even if he gets out, he'll run. He always was a coward at heart," she finished. That evening, I sat in the house on Oak Street, Mom's house, finally free of Frank's poison. I'd had a cleaning service come through, had the locks changed, the window repaired. It still smelled like failure and fear. But underneath, I caught hints of something else, the lavender potpourri Mom used to make, the lemon cleaner she'd favored. Ghosts of better times. Rachel stopped by with dinner from the diner. "Everyone's talking about it," she said. "About what you did. Some people are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got tired of being scared." "Same thing." "Maybe." As we ate, I thought about the 18-year-old who'd fled this house in the middle of the night. She'd been right to run. Staying would have killed her spirit, if not her body. But she'd also been wrong to think running was the only option. Sometimes you had to stand and fight. Sometimes you had to become the very thing your tormentor feared most, someone with power, connections, and absolutely nothing left to lose. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the Milwaukee area code. Debt settled. No need for further action. I deleted it without responding. Frank Dalton's house of cards hadn't just fallen. It had been scattered to the winds. The man who'd made my teenage years a nightmare, who'd slowly killed my mother with neglect and greed, who'd preyed on the vulnerable for over a decade, was finally facing justice. Not the justice of courts and lawyers, though that would come, but the justice of exposure, of consequences, of a community finally saying enough. Tomorrow, I'd start preparing to bring Mom home. There would be treatments to manage, healing to attempt, time to make up for, if possible. It wouldn't be easy. The damage Frank had done to her body, her spirit, her faith in herself couldn't be undone overnight. But for the first time in 14 years, she'd be free. We both would be. The scared girl in the driveway was finally at peace. The woman who'd returned had finished what needed to be done. Justice, I'd learned, sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it comes from the person who was once powerless deciding they've had enough. Sometimes it comes from driving 2,000 miles to face your demons, only to discover they were never as powerful as your fear made them seem. The call came at 3 a.m, Tommy Morrison's voice, tense and professional. "Emily, Frank made bail." I sat up in the hotel bed, instantly alert. "How? Who posted it?" "Some associate from Milwaukee. We are not sure of the connection, but Frank's already violated the restraining order. He was seen near your mother's house an hour ago. We have units looking for him." "He'll come here," I said, already getting dressed. "To the hotel. He knows where I'm staying. We've got a unit in the parking lot." "But Emily, this feels different. He's got nothing left to lose now." I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I arrived in Milford. Every night I'd run through scenarios, planned responses, prepared for Frank's final desperate play, but knowing something intellectually and facing it were two different things. I moved the chair away from the door, packed my essentials quickly. If Frank wanted a confrontation, he wouldn't get it on his terms. I called the front desk, warned them about a potentially dangerous guest, then slipped out the back exit. The streets of Milford were empty at this hour, the town sleeping peacefully while a predator hunted. I drove to the one place I knew Frank would eventually go, Mom's house. If he was going to make a stand, it would be there, in the place he'd ruled for so long. Sure enough, his truck was parked crooked in the driveway, driver's door hanging open like he'd been in a hurry. The house was dark except for a light in the kitchen. I parked across the street and called Tommy. He's at the house. I'm watching from outside. Do not approach. We are 5 minutes out. But 5 minutes was too long. I saw movement in the kitchen window. I heard the crash of breaking dishes. He was destroying what little we'd managed to salvage, erasing any trace of peace. I made a decision that went against every safety protocol, every piece of advice I'd been given. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. It was unlocked, frank, arrogant to the end. Inside, the destruction was methodical. Family photos torn from walls, Mom's remaining china smashed, furniture overturned. He was in the kitchen pouring gasoline from a red canister onto the floor. Going to add arson to your charges, Frank? He spun around, swaying slightly. His face was haggard, eyes bloodshot and wild. The man who'd once terrorized me looked pathetic. A cornered rat preparing to burn everything rather than surrender. You, the word came out slurred. You did this, turned everyone against me, destroyed my life. Your life was built on the suffering of others. It was always going to collapse. He laughed, ugly and bitter. Suffering. I gave your mother a home. Stability. I took care of her when you ran away like a coward. You took everything from her. Her money, her health, her dignity. You're a parasite, Frank. And parasites eventually kill their hosts. He set the gas can down, pulled a lighter from his pocket. Maybe we should all burn together. You, me, this house full of memories. Wouldn't that be poetic? What would be poetic is you facing justice for once in your miserable life. I kept my voice calm, but I was calculating distances, angles, options. The gas fumes were getting stronger. One spark and we'd both be engulfed. Justice, he sneered. He flicked the lighter. Flame dancing. There's no justice for men like me. Just survival or destruction. Guess which one I'm choosing. There's a third option. Redemption. It's not too late. Frank, put the lighter down. Face what you've done. Take responsibility for once. Responsibility. He moved closer, and I could see the full extent of his deterioration. I'm responsible for keeping your worthless mother alive for 14 years. Fed her, housed her, put up with her weakness. You're responsible for terrorizing an entire town, for stealing from the elderly, for destroying lives. They were weak, he roared. They deserved what they got, just like you deserved. What? I prompted. What did I deserve, Frank? He smiled then, cruel and knowing. You deserved everything you got. Every push, every shove, every reminder that you were nothing, just like your mother. Weak, pathetic, worthless. Is that what you tell yourself? That your victims deserved it? That a 12-year-old girl deserved to live in fear? You needed discipline, structure. If your mother had been a better parent. My mother was fine until you showed up. We were happy. Poor, but happy. You're the poison that destroyed everything. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Poor, but happy. You're the poison that destroyed everything. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Frank heard them, too. His face twisted with rage and panic. They'll never take me alive, he said, raising the lighter higher. Yes, they will, because deep down, Frank, you're a coward. You've always been a coward. Brave when facing children and the elderly, but a coward when confronted with real consequences. Shut up. You want to know why I really came back? I stepped closer, ignoring the danger. Not to save my mother, not even to get justice. I came back to see you for what you really are, a pathetic, aging con man who peaked at petty crime and domestic terror. I said, shut up. He lunged forward with the lighter. But 14 years of preparation had made me ready. I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and used his momentum against him. The lighter flew across the room as Frank crashed into the kitchen table. You little, but I was already moving, kicking the gas can away, heading for the door. Frank scrambled after me, rage making him clumsy. We spilled out onto the front lawn just as police cars screeched to a halt. Down on the ground now, Tommy's voice boomed, amplified by a megaphone. Frank stood there swaying, looking between me and the officers with their weapons drawn. For a moment, I thought he might charge them, force their hand in some twisted version of suicide by cop. Instead, he turned to me one last time. Your mother will never be free of me. Neither will you. I'll always be there in every nightmare, every flinch, every moment of doubt. No, I said quietly. You'll be in prison, and we'll be healing. That's the difference between us, Frank. We can recover from what you've done. You can't recover from what you are. He dropped to his knees, all fight gone. And Tommy moved in with the cuffs. As they led Frank away, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not the monster of my memories, but a broken man who'd built his identity on the suffering of others. The house, reeking of gasoline, but it hadn't burned. Like Mom, like me, it had survived Frank Dalton. Damaged, but standing. I stood in the driveway where, 14 years ago, he'd pushed me down, where he'd told me I was nothing, where my journey had really begun. The circle was complete, but the ending was different than either of us had imagined. You okay? Tommy asked, returning after Frank was secured in the patrol car. Yeah, I said. I think I finally am. That was incredibly dangerous, what you did. Confronting him alone. I needed to face him. Not the memory, not the fear, but the actual man. I needed to see that he had no power over me anymore. Tommy nodded. The prosecutor will want your statement with the attempted arson, the violation of the restraining order, and everything else. Frank's looking at serious time. Good. As the police cars pulled away, taking Frank Dalton to face justice, I sat on the front steps of Mom's house. The eastern sky was starting to lighten. A new day beginning. Inside, there was gasoline to clean up, damage to repair, a life to rebuild. But for the first time in 14 years, the shadow that had loomed over this place was gone. Not just physically removed, but exposed for what it had always been, not an all-powerful monster, but a small, cruel man who'd mistaken fear for respect and control for strength. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the Milwaukee area code. Debt settled. No need for further action. I deleted it without responding. Frank Dalton's house of cards hadn't just fallen. It had been scattered to the winds. The man who'd made my teenage years a nightmare, who'd slowly killed my mother with neglect and greed, who'd preyed on the vulnerable for over a decade, was finally facing justice. Not the justice of courts and lawyers, though that would come, but the justice of exposure, of consequences, of a community finally saying enough. The morning after Frank's final arrest, I stood in the doorway of room 204, watching my mother sleep. The machines beeped steadily, but her breathing was deeper now, more peaceful. It was as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her chest. He's really gone, she asked without opening her eyes. He's really gone, Mom. Attempted arson, assault, violating a restraining order. His bail's been revoked. The prosecutor says, with all the charges combined, he's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Her eyes opened then, and for the first time in over a decade, I saw my mother, not Frank's victim, but Laura Ross, the woman who'd once danced in our kitchen and sung me to sleep. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. For choosing him, for not protecting you, for being too weak. Stop, I said, taking her hand, careful of the foreline. We've both paid enough for Frank's choices. No more apologies, just healing. 3 weeks later, I brought her home. The house had been cleaned. The gasoline smell replaced with fresh paint and new beginnings. Mom's friends from before Frank, women who'd been pushed away by his controlling behavior, began stopping by with casseroles and conversation. The isolation he'd imposed was crumbling like everything else he'd built. I extended my leave from work, setting up a temporary office in Mom's spare room. My life in Riverton felt distant, like something from another person's story. Here, watching my mother slowly reclaim her space, her voice, her identity, felt more important than any creative campaign or corporate ladder. One afternoon, I found her in the backyard, kneeling by the dead rose bushes. I thought I might try again, she said, holding a new plant. Different roses, stronger ones. They need help. Together, we dug out the old, dead roots and planted new life. It was a small thing, but in that moment, it felt like everything. The trial, when it came 6 months later, was almost anticlimactic. Frank, faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of dozens of victims, took a plea deal, 17 years, no possibility of early parole. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his hair gone grey. The swagger had completely disappeared. When the judge read the sentence, he didn't even react, just stared at his cuffed hands like he couldn't understand how they'd ended up there. I testified about the gasoline, the threats, the years of control and fear. My voice didn't shake. The 18-year-old girl who'd run might have cried, might have felt guilt or pity, but I felt nothing for Frank Dalton except a distant kind of satisfaction. He was just a chapter ending, a period at the end of a very long sentence. Mom testified, too, her voice growing stronger with each word. She talked about the financial abuse, the isolation, the way he delayed her cancer treatment to feed his gambling addiction. When she finished, several jury members were wiping their eyes. How do you feel? The prosecutor asked her. Free, she said simply. For the first time in 14 years, I feel free. After the sentencing, we stood outside the courthouse. The Milford Gazette was there, Susan Walsh asking for quotes. Mom surprised me by stepping forward. I want other women to know, she said into the recorder, that it's never too late. That shame isn't yours to carry, that there are people who will help if you just reach out. I waited too long, but I survived. You can, too. That night, we sat on the porch of the house on Oak Street, watching fireflies dance in the yard where new roses were beginning to bloom. Mom was thin, still worn from chemo, but there was color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. Will you go back? She asked. To Riverton? To your life there? I'd been wrestling with that question for weeks. My apartment, my career, my carefully constructed existence, it all waited for me. But something had shifted during these months in Milford. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe, eventually. But not yet. I don't want you to sacrifice your life for me. Not again. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing. There's a difference. She nodded, understanding in a way she couldn't have before. We sat in comfortable silence. Two survivors on a porch, watching the world continue its ancient rhythms. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel with a photo, Janet Mills at the senior center, laughing at something. Bob Patterson had helped her organize a support group for Frank's victims, turning their shared trauma into shared strength. The ripples of change spreading through Milford went far beyond just our story. You know what the strangest part is? Mom said suddenly. I don't hate him. I should, but I don't. He's just nothing to me now. Like a bad dream you can barely remember once you wake up. I thought about that as the stars came out over Milford. Frank had loomed so large in our lives, had seemed so powerful, so inescapable. But in the end, he was just a man who'd mistaken fear for respect, who'd built his kingdom on the suffering of others. And kingdoms built on suffering always fall. Thank you, Mom said quietly. For coming back, for fighting when I couldn't. For showing me it was possible to win. We both won, Mom. We survived him. That's the biggest victory of all. A year later, I did return to Riverton, but not to the life I'd left. I started a non-profit focused on helping victims of financial abuse and domestic violence in small towns, places where everyone knows everyone, where silence is currency, and shame runs deep. Mom served on the board, her story inspiring others to break their own silences. The last time I drove through Milford, I passed the courthouse where Frank was convicted, the hospital where Mom found treatment and hope, the community center where his victims found their voices. But when I passed the house on Oak Street, I didn't feel the old clenching fear or anger. I saw my mother's roses blooming, red and vibrant against the white siding. I saw her car in the driveway, a car in her name, bought with her money, driven on her terms. I saw curtains she'd chosen, a life she was rebuilding. The girl who'd been pushed down in that driveway was gone, but not forgotten. She'd grown into someone who understood that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about people finding their voices, communities refusing to look away, and survivors choosing to thrive despite everything done to them. Frank Dalton had tried to make us nothing. Instead, he'd forged us into something unbreakable. He'd thought fear was power, but we'd learned the truth. Real power comes from standing up, speaking out, and refusing to let anyone make you small. The highway that had brought me back to Milford stretched out ahead. But I wasn't running anymore. I was simply moving forward, carrying the lessons of that journey, that it's never too late to fight back, that silence protects the wrong people, and that sometimes you have to drive halfway across the country to find the courage that was inside you all along. The speedometer steady, the road clear, I drove toward a future Frank Dalton could never touch. Behind me, Milford continued its quiet existence, forever changed by one woman's refusal to let a bully win. Justice had come to our small corner of the world, delivered not by wishes or prayers, but by determination, evidence, and the simple act of saying enough. The girl in the driveway had found her voice, and she would never be silenced again. Your support means everything, and it helps these important stories reach those who might need to hear them.